Hi everyone, my name's Soham, and I'm a fourth year medical student at the University of Oxford. Um, Before we go all in about what it means to be a medic at Oxbridge, let's ask ourselves this question. Should we apply for medicine at Oxford or Cambridge? A question that I'm often asked is this. I'm thinking of applying to Oxford or Cambridge for medicine next year. My teachers tell me I have a strong application, but is it going to be worth the extra effort? What do Oxford and Cambridge offer that other medical schools do not? That is such a perspective question. Just because you have the grades to do something doesn't automatically make it the right decision. Yes, Oxford and Cambridge do routinely get excellent teaching scores across all courses, and the degrees are highly regarded both in the UK and internationally. But does that mean if you're a top student and want to be a doctor, you should automatically be applying to Oxford and Cambridge? The answer to that is no. This is a decision that should be multifaceted, not a knee-jerk reaction of just shooting off an Oxford medical application as soon as you possibly can. So, what does it mean to be an Oxford medical student? Well, first of all, do Oxford medical students make better doctors? Well, all medical schools in general select the brightest students. As a patient, Oxford and Cambridge students are not easy to differentiate from other students once they become junior doctors. Some are good doctors, whilst others are bad. Some are disillusioned with medicine, others are keen and enthused. Pretty much, junior doctors are quite a homogenous bunch overall. So let's ask ourselves another question. What about the workload in Oxford and Cambridge? Well, typically, Oxbridge medical students have less free time per week than students from any other UK medical school. At Oxford or Cambridge, you will be writing more essays in 1 year than a non-Oxbridge colleague will write during the whole 5 or 6 years of their medical undergraduate training. Now, does assignment writing make you a better doctor? Well, the evidence for that's a bit unclear, but plenty of people have pretty strong opinions about it, especially your college tutors if you do end up coming to Oxbridge. And the better question, I guess, to be asked would be, does doing more assignments help you better retain information? Quite possibly, yes, personally. But contrary to what some might tell you, most of your clinical training will actually take place in the first few years after graduation, when you'll be allowed to prescribe drugs, make clinical decisions, organize investigations, treat sick patients, and learn how to perform basic surgical procedures. This is the on-the-job training that has always been the integral part of a medical career, and it's something that all medical schools will eventually give you once you qualify. So it's not something that Oxbridge alone can possibly deliver. And the next thing to ask is, do Oxford medical students learn things in a lot more detail? Well, yes, they possibly do learn a lot more things in a lot more detail at a preclinical level. But once you hit the wards in year 3, clinical training doesn't differ hugely across medical schools. It's more dependent on the individual clinicians and their enthusiasm for teaching, which is quite variable. There are plenty of tutors and clinicians that are so good in other universities, may that be Liverpool, may that be Imperial. Across the country, there are such good teachers. And equally, there are quite poor ones in Oxford and Cambridge, and equally, there are great ones as well. Well, I think an important point to consider here is that plenty of Oxford students do leave for London for their clinical training anyway. So the big difference, therefore, is do you really want a preclinical level of detail of knowledge of theoretical basis of everything there is to do with medicine? There is no doubt that teaching in anatomy, physiology, and other basic sciences is more in depth and better taught at Oxbridge than other medical schools, which have a more integrated view of teaching all these different topics. And it's not over dependent on PBL, which certain other institutions are, which because Oxford does a technique called tutorials, where essentially you have a tutor, and then you have a 3 or 4 students going to that tutor, and you talk and discuss about a certain essay topic or a topic overall, be that, for example, addiction to certain drugs, or for example, the infection rates of malaria in a certain country and how we can control global pandemics. And you have a one-to-one discussion with with a leading tutor in that subject, and that's not something you'd get at another institution. But this medical science teaching, does that actually help after graduation? Well, the stats do say that Oxford and Cambridge graduates are more likely to pass all their Royal College and specialty exams the first time around. But in my experience of talking to junior doctors, applying for most postgraduate exams still need to revise their anatomy and physiology all over again. So regardless of how good your teaching was in a preclinical and pre-graduation stage, we kind of need to revise everything again because pretty much most of us are pretty forgetful. So it's therefore difficult to say how much benefit an Oxford education actually does give you. What it does mean is that you get to go to Oxford, but it's still a vocational degree with a practical career at the end of it, regardless of which university you went to. Now, another thing that it's in a lot of people's minds is about the exams and how people are graded in Oxford and Cambridge. Now, Oxford and Cambridge always try to outdo other universities, and this applies to their exams as well. And typically, Oxford medical students have a harder end of year exams than other medical students across the country. That's another thing you want to consider. Do you want hard exams just for the sake of hard exams? Because there is no evidence to say that a harder exam makes a better doctor. Now, I know most of you are probably considering Oxbridge because of its high rankings in all the league tables, but should you actually care about the rankings when it comes to Oxford or Cambridge? Well, if you're studying a truly academic course like biology, physics, English, or even PPE, there probably isn't a university like Oxford or Cambridge that offer better teaching and better employment or earning prospects when you graduate. However, medicine is a vocational course, and simply training to be an FY1 doctor at the end of 6 years, you're pretty much guaranteed a job upon graduation, wherever you train, and you're pretty much graduated the same. You're pretty much guaranteed the same quality of teaching after you graduate. So there is no difference of which university you qualify from when it's medicine, because as I said earlier, all the teaching that's really important comes after graduation. And in terms of competitiveness for different specialities, well, current selection for the most competitive specialities such as cardiothoracics, orthopedics, and plastics are what's on a points-based system. So you get a point for getting an honors degree and for getting prizes at an undergraduate level. And you can get those points at any university. There isn't any specific points for getting an honors degree from Oxford or an honors degree from another university. So as long as you do your integrated degree at a university, integrated degree being the other honors degree that isn't medicine, you'll get the required points for the more competitive specialities. So don't worry, not having an Oxford degree won't hold you back, and equally having an Oxford degree won't hold you back. There are some clearly good reasons for applying to medicine at Oxbridge, and these are key. These are a few that I think are quite good reasons. So Oxford and Cambridge give you a really good academic background. So if you're keen to have an academic career after graduation, Oxford or Cambridge could be for you. If you intend to apply internationally, then Oxford or Cambridge once again can be for you because Oxford and Cambridge are recognized as good medical institutions internationally. If you want to do medical sciences and as a degree and then consider other options, then it's good. Then medicine, Oxford and Cambridge could be for you because you're allowed to leave after the first 3 years to a different course if you see that's the best thing for you. And also, living expenses can be quite a big thing for medicine because we're in university for 5 or 6 years. So if you live in Oxford or Cambridge, it could probably save you a lot of money if you potentially go here while saving costs and living expenses. If you also want the prestige of an Oxford or Cambridge degree and want to be a doctor, then obviously Oxford and Cambridge is once again good for you. But I feel the most common reason people go to Oxford or Cambridge, and a reason that I kind of wanted to go here, was because when you come to one of these cities, it's such a beautiful place. Like you can see the beautiful architecture, the gardens, kind of like how everything's spaced around it. It's so charming in such a way that you kind of fall in love with the place and you kind of want to go there. And it's a common problem that I feel many people have about Oxford and Cambridge. So, in summary, if you want to go to Oxford and Cambridge and you've got excellent CV and the required grades, my advice would be to definitely do the preclinical stage here because you'll definitely get an academic background that you wouldn't have achieved any other university institution. But in terms of clinical skills, any institution that's a medical school probably give you the same thing. So I'll talk to you a bit more about exactly what it means to do preclinical and clinical at the Oxford Medical course. So medicine in Oxford is a 6-year course, And there's 3 years of preclinical studies followed by 3 years of clinical studies. So it's a course called A100 if you're an undergraduate, and if you're a graduate, there's a slightly different course which is only 4 years, where you do a first year by yourself, and then your later 3 years are the 3 clinical years that undergraduates do. So let's talk about the preclinical stage first. So this is what we call the first Bachelor of Medicine, and it also includes a course in the principles of clinical anatomy. And at the end of it, you get a Bachelor of Arts in Medical Sciences. So the preclinical stage consists of 3 different years. So the first year, you do 5 different topics. So the first topic is organization of the body. The second topic, physiology and pharmacology. Third topic, biochemistry and medical genetics. Fourth topic, medical sociology. And the fifth topic, patient-doctor. So I'll talk a bit more about each of these 5 topics, and then we'll move on to the second year. So organization of the body is essentially about how the body is structured and the functions of its various organs. So organization of the body involves you learning from a cellular level how the histology, i.e. that's how the cells look like in various different organs systems. And you get to have a good understanding about the architecture of, for example, how a liver should look under the microscope compared to a kidney, compared to a heart, etc., etc. After you learn the histology basis, you then move on to a gross basis, which means the whole organ in itself. So what you see if you're a surgeon, and you learn about why it's in this compartment of the body, what it means for these cells to come together to form this kind of shape. You also kind of learn the embryology side of it. So how did a heart form there? How do we have scrotums that develop in our stomach but then move down to the testes? So we kind of learn all about embryology, histology, gross anatomy. That's what organization of the body is about. It's all about learning about the bigger picture and about how the body works in its various different parts. Physiology and pharmacology. This is what it says on the tin, essentially. It's all about the drugs and the physiology of the body. So you learn about 30 or 40 drugs in first year, and each of those drugs are related to a certain kind of system in the body. And these systems are formed the major systems in the body. So that could be the cardiovascular system, the physiology of that, or the respiratory system and the physiology of that, or the urinary system and the physiology of that. And then you learn what drugs are best targeted at various aspects of that and what happens if it goes wrong. But before you learn what goes wrong, you've obviously got to learn what goes right. Hence why we learn physiology and then pharmacology for when things go wrong. There's also biochemistry and medical genetics. So biochemistry is pretty much what you guys are probably doing at A-level or IB. This involves learning like the Krebs cycle. This involves learning other various biochemical cycles that you've probably encountered already at A-level. But now we learn a bit more about the evidence base behind why it's important for various metabolic diseases and other genetic diseases that some people have. So a common one that you might hear that might also be useful for interviews is phenylketonuria, which was one of the very first genetic diseases discovered in the UK, where it's currently a screening program for babies. So babies who have PKU or phenylketonuria are screened for across the country because there's a very simple treatment for it, and it's potentially fatal if you don't. And it's all due to and you basically get an idea of what causes it by studying biochemistry and medical genetics. Medical genetics also talks a bit more about the DNA itself, and this is becoming more and more important within the medical system and the NHS itself. For example, in October from this year, in October, clinicians will now request to have a full DNA sequence of their patient because it's so cheap now. It's about £1,000 to sequence a whole DNA. In previous years, this might have been £10,000, £20,000, but now because the cost has come down by over like 65,000% apparently, and so eventually sequencing the whole DNA is now cheaper than sequencing or looking for a single gene. So there's a whole move to do more medical genetics and get clinicians more familiar with genetics, which is obviously going to be a bigger part of your future careers when you go into medicine. And the fourth subject is medical sociology, where you basically learn about different topics in terms of population health, in terms of how we should deal with the aging population in the future, and how we should deal with the growing population, and how we should allocate resources, and how we deal with pandemics and epidemics and endemics, all about the sociology side of medicine. So it's a bit less science and a bit more arts, because overall medicine isn't a pure science, it's a bit of an art and a science together. You also have a patient doctor course in year one. So the patient doctor course involves you going to a GP surgery about 6 hours in about 1 hour a week, typically. Overall, it's about 6 hours and 6 hours together just on a day, but on average, it works out to 1 hour a week. And you just spend some time talking to patients and learning to take histories and learning about certain conditions from a patient's point of view. So you learn, for example, about diabetes from a patient's point of view and how it affected their life and why it's such a hard disease to live with. You also learn, for example, that genetic diseases are quite a hard thing to deal with because as a patient, you can track it through your family tree and see that this person's had this person's had this. You pretty much got a high chance to have it, and you've got to deal with talking to patients and getting into their mindset of knowing how difficult it is to live with that information in your head. So that's year one. And at the end of year one, you have examinations on those 5 topics. And after that, that forms a part of your BM1 degree. And you get either a distinction, merits, or pass, depending on how you did. Year two, you have then examinations for your BM2, which is the second part of your biomedical degree, of your medicine degree. Sorry, and this constitutes of 5 parts again. So this is integrated systems of the body, the nervous system, general pathology and microbiology, psychology for medicine, and the patient doctor course. So once again, I'll talk you through these 5 different topics, and you can tell me later on in the Q&A whether you have any questions about them. So we'll start again with the integrated systems of the body. So integrated systems of the body basically involves looking at all the organs of the body and the physiology of those various organs, much like first year. But in this case, instead of just looking at them separately, we look at how they intertwine and how one affects another. For example, we look at how the kidney system affects the heart system. And we look at when something goes wrong in the kidneys, how it could affect the heart, or when something goes wrong in the heart, how it could affect the liver or the lungs. Because at the end of the day, our organs don't function independently. We're not like machines where each unit works in separation. We're a whole organism that everything is needed together for the body to function. And that's all what integrated systems of the body is all about, to learn how everything works together and how a drug doesn't just have effects on the organ you want it to, but it has systemic effects, i.e. widespread effects across the whole body. We also have a topic on the nervous system. That is what it says, just the nervous systems. We learn all about the brain, the spinal cord, and all our nerves along our body. So we learn about how which nerves control what body parts, how we know what nerves affected by what's hurting or what's tingling, how we can identify what type of spinal trauma you've had from what sensations you've lost, what sensations have increased. We learn about the areas of the brain and what each part of the brain does, and it's such an interesting course, and I have a particular interest in the nervous system, so I'm looking forward to going into that further in my clinical years. But I found that to be such a great experience, and from my fellow colleagues in clinical school, including graduates and undergraduates, the nervous system is very well taught at Oxford. So if you have an interest in learning about the brain, which is currently an interesting topic in the field of research and medicine in general, because there's so little known about it, that's another good reason to choose Oxford or Cambridge if Oxford or Cambridge is in your eyesights. The third topics I want to talk about is the general pathology and microbiology, which once again says what it says on the tin. So we're just looking at the various infections that the common infections that a human can encounter, and some uncommon as well in England, but these infections would obviously be common in some countries. So infections such as leishmania is common in Africa. Another infection such as trypanosomes is common in Africa. It's actually called the African sleeping sickness because of how common it is in Africa. We learn about those infections, what makes them tick, specific molecules and proteins they have to give them advantages in another organ in our bodies, and how they can beat our immune systems. We also learn exactly how our immune system protects us and how it can go wrong. So we learn about autoimmune diseases, and which basically means when the immune system attacks the host body. So we learn about, for example, diseases such as SCID. You might have come across this in the idea of the bubble boy. So this was quite prevalent in the news in the last few years, of a boy who lived in a bubble, and he couldn't encounter anything in the environment because anything could pretty much kill him because he had no immune system. and he had to live in the bubble his whole life. And there was actually a treatment. There was actually a look out for a treatment to cure this, and they tried to do genetic engineering on the DNA of some individuals who had such a disease. And currently, it improved their life expectancy by a few years, but they all developed cancer. So treatments are currently very experimental and very dangerous. But even though given their danger, they still do more harm. They still do more good than harm. So just goes to show you how severe an autoimmune disease can be if you have a severe autoimmune disease. The fourth thing that we do in second year is psychology for medicine, which is another very cool topic. We learn about psychology. We look at various thought experiments. We learn, for example, about the fact that if we use different words when reciting what happened, it creates completely different images and creates completely different ideas in a patient. So, for example, if you tell a patient that they were in a car, if, for example, you tell a patient they were in a car crash and their car smashed into another car, it causes worse imagery in their head and they feel worse than if you just tell a patient they were in a car crash and their car hit another car. That creates a much, much more benign imagery and they have much better therapeutic potential in the future. So psychology is such an interesting field, and you learn so much about, for example, it's mental health and other factors which are very contemporary aspects of medicine that previous doctors and generations may not have dealt with, but it will definitely be a forefront of our medical generation. So definitely another point to definitely look into in terms of Oxford and Cambridge. We then continue the patient doctor course from first year in terms of we go to the GP again. We have 1 hour week sessions with patients. We learn more about their condition and how it's affected their life from their point of view. Because at the end of the day, as doctors, we want to help patients live in the best way they can with their disease in their own life. We don't want to impose a new life system on them because that's not the idea of a doctor. The idea of a doctor isn't to be some patriarchal figure who forces things, ideas, and situations onto patients. They want to be health managers, someone who helps a patient live with a condition in their life currently. So at the end of second year, we have an exam on all this after only 2 terms. So we don't have a full 3 terms to learn all this. It's quite intense. I think at one point it was in the Guinness World Record for the most information learnt in a year. So as once again, it's a lot of information in a very short amount of time. But then the term after that, the third term, it's probably one of the best terms of any university life, because you pretty much have not much work to do, because at that point in time for that third term, you'll be involved in doing a research project. So this is the part of your course that it's pretty much dictated by yourself. So you get to decide what research you do, what you want to do it in, and you can definitely pursue something you're definitely interested in. So I pursued an autoimmune disease called ankylosing spondylitis, which is basically an autoimmune disease that affects the spinal cord and the pelvic area, and it causes inflammation of the spinal cord in such a way that they might be fused together and a person's unable to move. And it's quite a debilitating disease, and it's actually one of the most common autoimmune diseases. And I spent my third term just researching into that, and I probably went into labs and went to the hospital about 3-4 hours a day, and I spent the rest of the day enjoying myself over summer. That's not a thing you get to do in most other medical schools. So it might be hard, but there are definitely perks within the university system. In year 3, you continue on with your research degree if you haven't finished, and then you choose a speciality topic. So in Oxford, and we have 5 speciality topics as opposed to Cambridge, which they have a lot more, and I'll come back to Cambridge in a second. So in Oxford, you have 5 different topics. You can either learn about neuroscience, genes and development, cardiovascular and respiratory physiology, infection immunity, or signaling in health and disease. So each of these 5 topics, you delve into that specific topic in a lot of detail, and you pretty much learn the contemporary research on that topic. So you pretty much got a broad-based knowledge as a leading researcher in infection immunity, say, or in neuroscience, let's say. So I did infection immunity, and I had to learn a very broad-based knowledge of contemporary fields in infection immunity, and to such an extent that I had to have the knowledge that a leading researcher would have in that field. And it was really interesting. I learned so much. I learned about how we track pandemics. I learned how we track epidemics. I learned, for example, about how malaria affects individuals in different countries and affects communities differently and affects specific individuals differently. I learned, for example, how bacteria have their own little capitalist and communist societies within themselves, and there's like economic systems within bacteria in terms of resources. And it's such an interesting view to take into medicine, where it's not just you look at the patient anymore. You look at how how infections and how our own body can turn against us, and how these little things that cause so much damage are actually so clever. And we also, after the preclinical, we have our clinical years. So this would be the end of our preclinical. And the clinical years essentially involve us going into hospital and having a lot of patient contact. And we're basically thrown into the real world. So fourth year, it's very, very chilled, very low pressure. We basically learn the basics of how to do various clinical examinations and the various processes that are involved in checking someone out and taking a proper history. In fifth year, it gets a lot more. It gets a lot more focused and a lot more intense. So we basically do 6 topics in fifth year. So we do a rotation in pediatrics, which is looking at children and looking at children's health and making sure we're fully qualified to go into pediatrics as a junior doctor. We then have a rotation obstetrics and gynecology. We learn all about pregnancy, birth, and the women's of vagina and uterus in general. And at that point in time, we can pretty much take care of women's health as a junior doctor after that rotation. We have a rotation on neurology, where we look at the brain and the various ways in which we understand the brain. And pretty much after that rotation, we're fully qualified as a junior doctor for neurology. Our fourth rotation is in the community healthcare. So we go to GPs, we look at population health and epidemiology and dermatology as well. And following that rotation, we're qualified as a junior doctor to cover those topics in hospital. And a sixth rotation is in orthopedics, trauma, and emergency medicine. So that's quite an exciting topic, and you've probably seen these specialities in casualty or various other TV programs. And following this course in fifth year, we're now fully qualified as a junior doctor to deal with the various cases that may come across in A&E and emergency medicine. So it's an intense course in fifth year, but you learn so much, and you basically get to act as a junior doctor in the front line. And you basically get to do what I presume all of you want to do, and why you're going into medicine, because you love actually helping people out and getting your hands dirty as you get scrubbed in and actually do things that can help people. I'm just going to give you a few. I'm just going to read out some few things some of my friends said about the Oxford course. So Alex, who's currently a fifth year at Oxford, he says this is why he applied to Oxford. So I was attracted to the strong scientific grounding of the Oxford medical course. The preclinical course enables you to gain in-depth knowledge of the science behind clinical practice while experiencing the primary scientific research that fuels medical progression. The first year encompasses organization of the body and so includes dissection, an incredibly useful tool in learning anatomy. Being lectured by people who are world leaders in their field is awe-inspiring and gives an edge to my learning. I'm currently in my fifth year and love the freedom and self-direction of my clinical experience. I'm developing skills as a scientist, which will be useful in clinical practice too, during my research projects that I do on the side. I'm getting to grips with topics that fascinate me. So that's a statement from Alex, who's a current fifth year, and he's loving what he does, as can be seen. So I'm going to give you another one, who's from Gordon. He's graduated, and now he used to do medicine, and now he works in the field of biotechnology. He graduated a long time ago, but he's still in Oxford, and hence I've got a statement from him. So he said, I studied medicine as an undergraduate and qualified as a doctor in 2004, but I've not remained working in clinical medicine in the NHS. Instead, I built my career in small high-growth biotechnology companies in the UK, California, and France. My time as an undergraduate at Oxford was hugely influential in seizing interesting scientific and business opportunities well outside the boundaries of a typical medical career in the NHS. So this is another focus that we have in Oxford. So for example, in your fourth year, you'll get what we call the biotechnology group. There are a bunch of fifth years who are very involved in medicine as an entrepreneurship kind of avenue. And there are various seminars and various lectures you can go to learn about biotechnology and about what's missing in terms of healthcare, and what you as an Oxbridge medical student could do to help improve the care that future generations can have. And that's that's a path that Gordon took, and is currently a growing field. So once again, if you don't want to do medicine, want to do something related to medicine, a career in Oxford to get the links to the biotechnology field could be a very good thing, because obviously there are many people who graduated from Oxford, decided they don't want to work in the NHS, but they've gone into a more business kind of approach, which is what Gordon's done. Now, I asked Joe, another guy at Oxford, about a few questions. So I asked him what the most unexpected thing about his course was. And he said writing essays. He didn't expect to be writing as many essays as he did. He had to write about 3 a week, but he found this to be a good way to solidify his knowledge. I then asked him a question about what he wished they told him when he was applying to university. He said the tutorials are by far the most helpful thing, and they're rare in universities around the country. Also, there are so many opportunities that are available to you in Oxford, and I really like the amount of things that I can get my hands involved in. The next question was the best thing that Oxford did for you. He said the friends. The people here are amazing, and you can have fascinating chats with them. Events are really fun in Oxford, and they're often in venues that you know have so much history. I then asked him what his favourite Oxford memory is. And he said, during the charity jailbreak event, when me and my friends hitched from Oxford to Dover, Brighton, and then back again. So jailbreak is where you basically have to escape from Oxford, get as far away from possible to win money for charity. And the further away you go, the more likely you are to win great prizes. So if, for example, the winner of the last year's prize won a ball ticket worth £200, where they got to meet bands at that some of the top bands in the country currently, basically. So it's definitely something to get your hands involved in if you do get into Oxford and do decide to come here. Reese, who's currently a fifth year again, so I asked him a few questions as well. So what's the most unexpected thing about your course? He said, I was surprised by how relaxed the tutors were. I was expecting tutorials to be official, scary, and have a general feeling of impending doom about them. But practically straight away, I found that my tutors were people I could easily talk to about anything at all. And they had absolutely no problems with me saying outright that I was clueless about certain topics. I've even had chocolates, cakes, and wine in tutorials supplied by my very own tutors themselves. So yeah, on that point as well, tutors are great people. They're not some scary academics. They basically look at you from a pastoral point of view and look to ensure that you have the knowledge to be a good doctor, a good scientist, and a good person. I've had tutors bring food pretty much every single tutorial. I've even had a tutor invite us round to her house. We met their children and we basically had like a lovely day with them on a day out. So they're such nice people. They want to get to know you. They essentially want to be carers for you outside when you're outside of your home. Another question I asked Reese. So what do you wish they told you when you were applying to university? Well, in terms of Oxford, I wish that had been open about how varied the people really are. Open days and interviews don't give an accurate representation, as the other students who are attending are always a little more reserved than they usually would be. I was actually tempted to choose to go to UCL because I was extremely concerned that it'd be too different to everyone at Oxford in terms of my sense of humour and general whimsicality to make any friends at all. Luckily, I chose Oxford, and I'm so glad that I did because I couldn't imagine having better friends. So don't worry at all if you have a view that Oxford and Cambridge have weird people, they're not for you. Oxford and Cambridge are dominated by people who are normal. They're dominated by people like yourselves who just want to go to Oxford and Cambridge because they're fallen in love with the city or because of some other reason. And you'll meet loads of normal people as well as the extremes that you've probably got as a stereotype for Oxford and Cambridge. Another question I asked for him was the best thing that Oxford did for him. He said, I'm a Moritz Hayman scholar, so probably that. Money has always been an ongoing problem throughout my life, and no one really wants to ask when they need help. It's meant that I can afford to do everything that my peers are doing and experience Oxford to the fullest. Also, the scholarship requires me to undertake a level of voluntary work, which is great because it's forced me to look into the Oxford Hub, through which I've made more friends and had some really fun experiences. And then I asked him what his favourite Oxford memory was, and he said, oh gosh, there are so many. I would say nights out because I love experiencing the nightlife. The medics dinner was amazing, which was a completely free 3-course meal with wine with all the medics at my college and tutors. No matter what college you go to, no matter which college you go to, you will definitely get that medics dinner, and it's definitely such a great food night and a night to get to know the rest of the medics and your future tutors. And it's definitely something that you'll all enjoy doing in your first couple of weeks at Oxford and Cambridge if you decide to go there. So enough about Oxford. Let's move on to Cambridge. So Cambridge, like Oxford, also has 3 years of preclinical and then 3 years clinical study. Much the same as Oxford, the 3 clinical years give you a Bachelor of Arts and a medical speciality, though. Not a Bachelor of Arts in medical sciences, but for example, it could be a Bachelor of Arts in biomedical or natural sciences or pathology or physiology. I even had a friend who did a Bachelor of Arts in philosophy. So Cambridge offers you a lot more choice for your third year in terms of what you want to do. And it gives you a lot more varied titles. So for example, if you want to do a career in English, you can get yourself an honours degree in English in a year. If you want to do a career later on in maths, you can probably get yourself an honours degree in maths. So Cambridge offers you a lot more flexibility in terms of if you're not enjoying doing a medicine degree, the third year lets you get another degree to go into different avenues or different fields of work, if that is what you want. Cambridge also has the added bonus of having double the amount of spaces as Oxford does. The number of spaces is governed by the government, and it's pretty much Cambridge pretty much has twice the number of spaces that Oxford does. So if you're keen to play the numbers, Cambridge might potentially be better for you if that is what you're interested in. In terms of preclinical years, it's much the same as in Oxford, but they have a much heavier focus on anatomy. So they have regular anatomy sessions where you have to go around identifying various body parts and listing, and basically you're basically on the clock, and you have to have you're challenged to identify the function, the structure, and where the body part is for various different or organs and body parts that have been pre-dissected already. So it's a lot more, and it's a lot less essay focused than Oxford. So Cambridge has a more bigger focus on multiple choice questions. So if you're interested in writing more essays and getting your English style more perfected, Oxford might be for you. However, if you're more of a person who prefers to do short answer questions and play with probability, essentially, that is what Cambridge is all about. So it gives you questions where there are very similar answers, but the slight differences is what makes one answer correct, another wrong. So it's a bit more knowing the exact details rather than just about writing everything you know in an essay. So different people like different things, and that is what Oxford and Cambridge. The main differences between Oxford and Cambridge. Another really big difference between Oxford and Cambridge is that in Oxford, after 3 years, you're allowed to leave to another institution, may that be Imperial, UCL, or any other London institution. In Cambridge, you have to stay in Cambridge. And unfortunately, Cambridge doesn't have that much hospital space. So in Cambridge, you're forced to go out a lot. So, for example, some maybe 3/4 of the year don't get to spend their clinical years in Cambridge. On the other hand, Oxford has a guarantee that you'll spend the majority of your clinical years in Oxford, which is a guarantee that no other medical school can give. So Oxford currently has the most clinical space for within its institution compared to any other medical school in the country. So if you want to stay in base for your clinical training, then Oxford is for you. But alternatively, Oxford does also give you opportunities to go abroad. So I've had friends who've gone to Singapore, to Sri Lanka, Indonesia, to the West Indies to learn more about a speciality when they're over there. I think that's pretty much all I have to say about the medicine courses at Oxford and Cambridge. So I'll move on now to the question and answer session. So just give me a second for me to pull that up, and I'll answer your questions live. So I've got some on my phone. Okay. So the first question, okay, from Ash D. Okay. Did you study in a state or grammar independent sixth form? Okay, so I studied in a grammar school, but the majority of people in Oxford have studied in a state or grammar school. So I think the current split between state and grammar and independent sixth form is about 60% state and grammar and 40% independent. So there is a clear precedence towards state or grammar. However, I feel that they are trying to widen access. So, for example, if your school doesn't have a history of sending many students to Oxford or Cambridge, you potentially get in contact with the admissions office at Oxford and Cambridge and ask for a college to come down to your school to give you tips on how to do interviews well, how to write personal statements, the best colleges to apply to for your specific school. They'll do that very well. I've also got a question from Nia Davies. Is first and second year all theory and third year patient contact? So as I've explained earlier on, so first year has majority of theory and some patient contact in terms of the GP. Similarly for second year. Third year, you have no patient contact at all. You're essentially doing a different degree, whether that's immunology, whether that's neuroscience, whether that's cardiology. You're essentially doing a specifically science degree at that point. So third year, there's no patient contact. And then fourth, fifth, and sixth year, it's all patient contact and very little theory because you should have ideally got the theory in first and second year. Let me just see if there are any more questions coming through. Um, All right. I don't think I've got any more questions. So for people watching, if you have any questions, just let me know now. I'll be on here for another for a while. So let me know. I'm just was currently still looking for more questions. Okay. What advice would you give to people applying? What grades and what extracurriculars? Okay, that's a really good question. Thank you for asking that, Nia. So, in terms of what advice would I give to people applying? So, in terms of what Oxford and Cambridge look at, is they look at your predicted AS grades ideally. So, try and do the best you can currently in your mock test and everything to get as high a predicted grade as you can. So, try and aim for around 2A stars if you can, because Cambridge a have 2A stars A as their minimum requirement. Oxford has a bit lower, A star double A, but try that as your minimum predicted grades. In terms of how best to prepare for Oxford and Cambridge in terms of applying for that, I guess it would be to probably put other things on hold in terms of other, for example, if you're doing an EPQ, that's probably not as revered in Oxford or Cambridge as the predicted grades would be. In terms of GCSE grades, they they currently hope you have at least about 5, 6 A stars and either 7 to 9s in your maths and English. So try and have those kind of grades if you want to go for Oxford or Cambridge. And in terms of what extracurriculars you need, well, Oxford and Cambridge don't have any requirements for extracurriculars, but also if there's a way you can contribute to the university, for example, you look at the university and there's something they don't have, then you can obviously say in your personal statement or in an interview, I really want to create this in the university because I think this is missing and it can be very important. For example, I have a friend in Liverpool who created it, who in a personal statement said, there's no Tamil society in Liverpool, and I want to create a Tamil society because there are so many people of the ethnic background of who are Tamil here, and that's just missing. And she came into university and created that society, and that's how she contributed. And that could be a way that you could gain some points as you see things that aren't there that you want to add to the university experience. And in terms of best way to prepare for the application process, I guess you have to sit the November BMAT for Oxford. You can sit the September BMAT for Cambridge. And so for BMAT, leave at least a month to prepare because it involves basically revising all of your GCSE physics again, your GCSE biology again, your GCSE maths and chemistry as well. So you need some time to make sure you have all the knowledge, and that could leave your A levels in the back burner for a while, but that's okay because your main goal at that point would be to get the BMAT done, and then come interviews. We'll have Medic Mentor will do an interview session with you, so don't worry, we'll cover that come the time. If you have any more questions, feel free to shoot them forward. Right, let me find again if anyone's asked a question. All right, I'll be here for another few minutes if you have any questions. If not, no worries. Just type it in the Q&A section if you do have any questions for me. In terms of If there are anything else, just any random questions at all, anything at all that you have that you're worried about Oxford or Cambridge, that any questions you have about a specific college, please feel free to ask about that. Oh, okay. Another question is coming through. So, what is the interview process like? That's a great question. Thank you again for asking. So, the interview process involves you, first of all, you apply to a specific college or you do an open application. And then, around about a month from the interviews, you get given two colleges and you have two interviews at each college for Oxford. In Cambridge, you get just one college and you get one interview from two different tutors in Cambridge because they have more applicants, so can't spend as much time in Cambridge as they do in Oxford. So in Cambridge, they have one. They have a ethical, a more personality based interview, and a more scientific based interview. So in the more scientific based interview in Cambridge, they kind of give you questions about topics that you might have covered in your AS level, but then they bring it up a notch. So for example, if for example they ask you about genetics, they might ask you specifically about a certain disease, let's say albinism, and they might ask you to explain certain things. It's all logical based. There is no need for you to know anything beforehand, but they essentially want you to work out the logic of various traits of albinism beforehand, from what they've given you. So for example, they could give you a question of there are two parents who aren't albino, and they have three children who are albino. Why is this? And then you can work out from that albino is a recessive trait. And then they'll give you another question of you have two parents who are albino and they have three children who aren't albino. And from that, you can work out, albinism can't just be a recessive trait. There must be various different types of albinism. So there must be two different types of albinos, and hence why their children have a recessive gene from each different type of albinism, but they themselves aren't albinistic. In terms of Oxford, you have two interviews each college, as I said, and two different colleges. And you go into the interview, and both interviews are both scientific and ethical. So there's half the interviews devoted to a scientific question and half the interviews devoted to an ethical question. So this is different from Cambridge, where a whole interview is devoted to your ethics and personality, and the whole interview is devoted to your scientific basis. So in terms of ethics and personality, they just want to know whether you're kind of moralistic, whether you understand what a good doctor should do in terms of the patient, in terms of do not lie, in terms of be honest, in terms of respect autonomy, in terms of basically normal ethical things that you'd have to deal with in the situation judgment part of the UK CAT. When you come down to that, you'll pretty much get very, very, very good at knowing what's good ethical wise. Then they use the interview scores of both colleges to kind of rate you. So each college ranks you by itself. So they rank you from first to last according to all applicants. And then they get your BMAT scores, and then they get your personal statements. And now, knowing which applicant had that BMAT score, which applicant had that personal statement, they can then alter their rankings. But very few colleges do. If they do, they might just adjust about one or two either way. And then they submit it to the main university board. And since you've applied to one single college, if whichever college you've applied to gets you automatically. However, if you haven't applied to a college and you've done an open application, whichever college lists you higher gets you. Equally, if, for example, you've applied to a college and you don't come into their top 6 or 7 places, if that's how many places they have, but you do come into the other college's top 6 or 7 places, you get pulled from the college that you applied to the other college. So that's why even if you've done badly at the college you applied to, it's worth carrying on and doing well at the other college interviews. So that's the interview process in terms of Oxford and Cambridge. So if you have any other questions, feel free to ask. It can be about anything. It can be about how is a sporting life at Oxford? How is a social life at Oxford? What kind of societies are there? Anything that you're kind of interested in, feel free to ask. If there's a specific thing you want to know about Oxford or Cambridge that you've always wanted to know, or for example, you want to know what colleges you specifically should apply to, like feel free to ask about that as well. Like if there are certain circumstances you want to take into account, then feel free to ask that as well, because different colleges do offer different things. There are some richer colleges, there are some poorer colleges, there are some colleges with greater facilities. So if you're really into cricket, There are colleges that have great cricket pitches. If you're into football, there are colleges with great football pitches. So there are various other things to consider when applying to Oxford, Cambridge, if in terms of college system. So do free to ask if you have any questions. So once again, I'll just see if there are any new questions coming in. And as I said, I'm here for a while. So if you do have any questions that you can randomly think of, just type them in and I'm happy to answer. Okay. All right. Okay. I don't think there seems to be any more questions coming in. So in summary, there are various reasons to apply to Oxford and Cambridge, both good and bad. In terms of why in terms of studying at Oxford and Cambridge, it's not the be end all. There are various medical institutions across the country equally good as Oxford and Cambridge, and you at the end of the day you'll become a doctor no matter where you go. Oxford and Cambridge have a distinct traditionalistic way of teaching medicine, so they do 3 years of preclinical and 3 years of clinical, but you're guaranteed to have a different degree as well as your medicine degree if you do medicine at Oxford or Cambridge. And in terms of there's a unique interview process and a unique system in Oxford where you have tutorials and a collegiate system rather than halls and a university-wide system. If you're interested in going to Oxford and Cambridge, I'd say go into their websites, read a bit more about their institutions, and learn a bit more about what it means to go to Oxford or Cambridge. Please do if you've enjoyed this webinar, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel, and thank you for listening to me. See you later, guys. Bye.